Institute, the editorial director of antiwar.com. He's has over 6,000 interviews on the Scot Horton show, the author of multiple books, including Provoked and Fool's Errand. Scott, welcome back to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Great to be with you, my man.
Well, Scott, I really am glad to be able to interview you this week. I know you're very busy. I see you on all kinds of programs, but there's so much developing in the Middle East and so much that you just have a vast wealth of knowledge to share with us on. So I want to ask you maybe the most difficult question you'll ever get. What the hell is Trump thinking? Who won the war in the Middle East? Was Iran even making nukes? And then what's next for the Middle East? So first up here, I have this clip of Donald Trump talking about kind of the end of the conflict between Israel and Iran.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
So, Scott, I've really had a hard time puzzling out what Trump is actually trying to achieve in the Middle East here with, first going along, it seems, with Israel war, bombing Iran, and then backing away from it and saying we got this ceasefire. So what the hell do you think is going on?
Well, you know what, man? I'm just going to crib from our good friend Daryl Cooper. We just recorded our very first show of our brand new show, Provoked, which he named it that, so I think it's okay. I named my last book. And his, I think, brilliant theory is that Trump is just bailing the Israelis out. The Israelis really hope that their initial barrage against the regime leadership over there would lead to a fall of the government and its replacement, their ability to parachute in the Shah's son or whatever regime change, and that they were using the nuclear program sort of as cover for that. And then Trump essentially came in and bombed the nuclear program as cover for just essentially giving the Israelis an out to say that, yeah, with America's help, we achieved our great victory. And so now everyone can essentially call it off because the Israelis had gotten themselves into a no-win war. Essentially, they're taking hits at the same time that they're giving them and not achieving much. You know, it was clear, as Daryl was saying very quickly, that the regime was not going to fall because of this, and if anything, was probably strengthened. And so then Trump, essentially in that sense, is dressing up his attacks on the nuclear facilities as the real end and all that was necessary, calling everything short of regime change, but claiming to have done enough damage to their nuclear facilities that no more bombing is necessary, that the Iranian nuclear program is set back enough to his satisfaction that, I guess, as they're saying, he's going to go into talks next week. I think the implication is threatening the Ayatollah, look, just don't even restart your program. I've called your bluff. And so maybe we can move forward without any kind of nuclear problem on the table between us at all. As he put it, we won't even need a nuclear deal because he thinks he's done so much damage to their program as it is. So that's my answer to your question. What do I think he's thinking? I guess that's probably the best explanation I've heard.
Yeah, well, I think that at least kind of made sense. And of course, Trump really seems to be all over the place right now. You know, one day he's talking about regime change in Iran. The next day he's backing away from it. But, next I want to ask you, Scott, who do you think kind of came out ahead in this conflict? And I have this clip from Donald Trump that I thought was very interesting.
I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, they've got a country, and they've got oil, and they're very smart people, and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings.
So, Scott, I know there's multiple ways to, look at this. Of course, more Iranians were killed than Israelis. Certainly more bombs fell in Iran than fell in Israel, but Israel is also a much smaller country, a much smaller population. They rely a lot on air defense interceptors. Those were apparently dwindling. And so I've seen some people say that actually it seems like Iran was able to maybe not come out on top in this, but certainly give as good as they got. So what's your interpretation of how this all ends out?
Well, I mean, I think the only real question, Kyle, to me is what are the Iranians going to do now? The Israelis, they took their best shot, I guess, at overthrowing the regime there, causing its collapse. But they have, with America's help, really set back the program, I think, probably pretty substantially. So they can take that as a victory there. The question is, what is the Ayatollah going to do in reaction to that? Is he going to double down and continue enrichment? They say that they removed a lot of the nuclear material before the bombings. And one report had them claiming they already have another new secret facility under construction that they'll put into use here. So the question is, I guess, ultimately, whether their bluff truly has been called by the United States, that your latent deterrent is no deterrent to us, or it's only a provocation to us. And so don't try it again, or we'll do the same thing to you again. They might conclude that, well, what are they going to do? Their ballistic missile deterrent that, we were afraid for a very long time, if this happened, that they might unleash everything they had, if they felt like it came down to their survival, that they might unleash a missile barrage at our forces in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain especially, and really threaten American servicemen over there. And they didn't dare to do that, right? He did another little old symbolic strike, called in ahead and warned, please shoot down these missiles, right? It can't do nothing, but it's just enough to save face. Ayatollah, which contrary to the myth of this guy's insanity and how he just wants to cause the apocalypse and everything, he wouldn't dare fight the United States of America. This is why I thought that somehow they would find a way to negotiate around this war even breaking out, because one side never wanted to fight. So what the hell? How can you have a war when the Ayatollah's going, look, man, you got me, And so I think they do got him pretty good, Kyle, here. And but we don't know what the consequences will be. And I don't know, and I should stipulate very clearly, I don't know the extent of the damage there. I've read quite a bit about it. David Albright, who is not 100% reliable, but is deeply informed at ISIS Online, has his analysis there of the damage to Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, and some of the other sites. Seems pretty extensive. And then politically, how Iran is going to react, I have no idea. As far as the Israelis, today, I don't know what their papers say. And, I did see a clip of Netanyahu crowing that this is the greatest victory he could ever hope for. So I think, politically, he's probably doing pretty well and can claim a victory. And let's all hope that the ceasefire holds. I mean, we really have nothing to fight about here. So if the Ayatollah is going to play it cool and not escalate on his side, then maybe it really can end right here. But then, of course, the question is, what are they going to truly do with what's left of their nuclear program? And how are the Americans going to respond to that?
Right. Well, I kind of feel the same way as you, as what is there even to fight about? When everybody talks about Tel Aviv's in interventions in the Middle East, why they wanted to have regime change in Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, destroy all these countries. Of course, it was about not having to make any deals with these countries, not having to worry about these countries as they are conducting an ethnic cleansing of Palestine and creating greater Israel. And if you look at what's happened over the past 6 months, Scott, Israel has invaded and taken a large swath of southern Syria. They've taken a large swath of southern Lebanon. They're in the process of ethnically cleansing Gaza and annexing the West Bank. And through all of this, the only things that Iran did were largely symbolic missile strikes on Israel, but those weren't even response to what Israel was doing to the Palestinians or to the Lebanese. It was because Israel blew up this Iranian consulate building in Syria, because they assassinated the Hamas political leader in Tehran. If it happened anywhere else in the Middle East, I'm not sure Iran would have responded to that at all. And so I guess, to your point, do you think that Israel could get what they want without fighting the Iranians again?
Yeah, I mean, looks like they've got it, right? They have severely crippled Hezbollah. They've overthrown Assad with the help of Al Qaeda in Syria and completely neutralized Iran's alliance with Syria. I read in Reason magazine, we better make a deal with Al Qaeda in there before Iran gets in there and does before we can. Yeah, thanks a lot for the great advice, Liz. Anyway, sorry, I've been carrying that chip on my shoulder for a couple of weeks here. Um, so they got Hezbollah. I mean, they killed the leader and with the pager attack, and the airstrikes have severely crippled them. They're completely rid of Assad. The Iraqi government is, mostly helpless, sitting in the middle here. I guess in a total war, they would be in it with Iran, but they're not doing too much. And of course, there's still the Houthis in Yemen, but they're a missile threat, but in a minor one-off every once in a while kind of a way. And that can, if the war in Palestine, the war against Palestine would end, that could be brought to an end pretty quickly. So depends just how far they want to go in Gaza and the West Bank. But I would think, I mean, look, we're only half a year into Trump's first year of his second term here. And I mean, I don't know what's stopping them, honestly, from going ahead and completing the cleansing of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The Europeans are gonna stop them, or Vladimir Putin is gonna threaten nuclear war or something. No. Who's gonna stop him? Donald Trump's attitude is do whatever you want. You saw, in his tweet today about how they ought to drop the charges against Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Loves the guy. He's just 100%. It's like, you and me, man, we're partners here. And like, they are just, um, why would Trump ever tell Netanyahu no? You know what I mean? The writing's on the wall. Jared Kushner gave that speech. He was like, man, Gaza's some nice beachfront property. If we just get rid of all the non-star belly sneeches here, and turn this thing into our own thing. And right, you don't need to look at it much deeper than that. It's on, man. Greater Israel is on. Just like in Netanyahu's speech at the UN in September 23, where he held up the map of the new Middle East. There's no occupied territories on there. It's all Israel now. As the average idiot says, well, why can't the Palestinians just go live somewhere else? Yep, that seems to be the policy. And what was the importance of the clean break, right? Why did David Wormser and Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl want to get rid of Saddam Hussein? Because they thought if America lorded it over the Shiite supermajority in Iraq, they could get them to tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start being in Syria and start being friends with Israel. And then that way the Israelis could steal Palestine without having to worry about Hezbollah on their northern flank. That's the clean break. Forget Oslo. We're taking this land and we're kicking these people out of here, but it'd be nice if we didn't have to deal with the Shiites in the north. So let's get America to overthrow Saddam Hussein for us. It was complete idiocy, and of course, only empowered Iran's best friends in the Dawah Party and Supreme Islamic Council and Muqtada al-Sadr as well, and his Mahdi army in the United Iraqi Alliance, all guys close friends with the Ayatollah. So, especially the former two there. So, it's completely idiotic, but that was what it was all about, was how do we get away with grand theft the rest of Palestine?
Mm-hmm. Well, and they certainly seem to be in the process of getting away with it, Scott. Now, you bring up something there that's interesting. Donald Trump's seeming undying love for Netanyahu. That post about him being a great Israeli and a great warrior. I mean, you almost worry about the mental health of the president when he's putting out statements that are so crazy like that. But
he said the same thing about the leader of Al Qaeda in Syria, Kyle. I don't know what to do. He's so brave and strong with a very tough past, killing Americans in Mosul and Ramadi. That's his tough past. But anyway, Netanyahu's killed a few Americans too.
Right. Well, isn't that crazy that, we've normalized relations with Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani, the leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, a veteran of the Iraq War who fought against the American side. And at the same time, I don't know if you noticed this, Scott, but in the run up to the American strikes on Iran, a lot of the U.S. government officials were saying that we have authorization to carry out this strike under the Constitution because during the Iraq War, Iran killed hundreds of Americans with their special IEDs in Iraq. And I know that this has been a real thing that you have been on for years and years and years now. So can you just quickly debunk that propaganda for us?
Yes, sir. It's very easy to, and it's all in my book, Enough Already. And there's a lot of other people who did a lot of great work on this. I'm not claiming to be the unique expert. The fact that it's true, lends itself to the possibility that a lot of other people would notice too, right? My take, that is, not their lies. And the lie was, it was clearly just a propaganda campaign by Dick Cheney and David Petraeus and Michael Gordon of the New York Times, especially, to pretend that every time a Shiite set off a bomb in Iraq, that Shiite Iraqi was not an Iraqi but an Iranian, and that bomb was not an Iraqi bomb but an Iranian bomb. And we know that's not true because there's a solid, I'm pretty sure, a dozen different news sources that reported from on the ground, American and foreign press, embedded with American soldiers, that today in Najaf or in eastern Baghdad or other places that are obvious Shiite strongholds where they were fighting against Muqtada al-Sadr and his forces from when they weren't fighting for them, that they would just pretend that, and they would find the factories where the locals were making them. And this put the lie to the pretension that they were all coming across the border from Iran. They were not either. And when the military laid out a big thing because they were going to do a press conference and say, see, this is the proof that all these bombs are coming from Iran, they all said made in Haditha or made in the UAE on them and all these things, showing that they hadn't come from Iran at all. Haditha is a city in Iraq. And when the reporters called him out, Stephen Hadley, who was Dick Cheney's guy and the second national security advisor under W. Bush, he admitted that, we didn't really have the evidence where we would like it to be. So we kind of had to close down the press conference, and we're going to come back and demonstrate the proof of our accusations at a later date. And then they never did. And that's because they were lying. And now what it really was the Shiites did have better roadside bombs than the Sunnis. The Sunnis are basically just using the broadly Sunni insurgency. Let me rewind one step. America fought that whole damn war for the Shiite supermajority against the Sunnis. So 4,000 out of the 4,500 Americans that died in that thing were killed by the Sunnis in the predominantly Sunni-based insurgency, as it was called. Okay. A couple of times, they essentially turned coat on one of the major three pillars of the United Iraqi Shiite Alliance, which was Dawa, Skiri, and Sadr. And they would turn on Sadr, claiming that he was the one closest to Iran, when in fact, he was the most nationalist of the Shiite leaders. He had not lived in Iran as Dawa and Skiri had. He, as soon as they toppled Saddam, they renamed Saddam City, Sadr City, after his father. Which is this Shiite ghetto in eastern Baghdad. And so he at times proposed and even sometimes forged working alliances with Sunni Arabs and declared repeatedly that he wanted America and Iran out and let Iraqi nationalism prevail and prevail over sectarian war. Now, don't get me wrong, because he did participate in sectarian war against the Sunnis when it suited his interests. There's no question about that. But the point is, because he was willing to tell America and Iran to go to hell, America preferred the pro-Iran factions because at least they weren't kicking us out. And the Americans hoped that they needed our guns and our money more than they needed their friendship with the Iranians next door, which turned out to be a bad bet. But they resented Sadr simply because essentially he was like what they would consider to be white trash, right? He was like this guy with bad teeth from the east side of town and who was not cultured and sophisticated like Abdulaziz al-Hakim, the leader of the Supreme Islamic Council, had his flowing gold robes and his fancy little hat and all this stuff in a way where Muqtada al-Sadr was a brute from the streets and who they weren't willing to really compromise with him or work with him, and they would target him from time to time. Anyway, point being, I'm going somewhere with this. Point being, whenever they fought the Sadrists had better roadside bombs. They had copper cores, which when they exploded, the copper would get super hot and would be a shaped charge that would cut right through armor. So they're really deadly against our guys fighting, especially in East Baghdad and in Najaf. And this would have been particularly in 2007 and 8, although they did fight the solderists in 2004 as well, especially in the spring of 2004. But the real fight against them was in 2007 and 8. And then this whole propaganda campaign was that all of these bombs were being shipped in by the Quds Force, the IRGC, Qasem Soleimani. And it was, I've been quoting this a lot lately, it keeps coming up. As George Bush would say, W. Bush, that is, I shorthanded it, meaning essentially he implied a bunch of lies, right? They go, and you're supposed to just infer them without him having to say it. So they kind of go, well, Iran killed all these soldiers in Iraq. And then you're just supposed to imagine how this works, right? And just like fill in the rest yourself, because they never explain exactly what they're talking about. But what they're saying is Iraqi Shiites, who, yes, were sometimes allied, this particular faction was sometimes allied with Iran and was supported by Iran, generally speaking, did fight against the Americans when the Americans attacked them, even though America fought the whole damn war for them, which is why Muqtada al-Sadr is one of the most powerful Shiite kingmakers in the country to this day. And nobody becomes prime minister of that country without his say-so to this day. And so, in other words, big complicated mess, but they're just lying. And I have a section in my book, Enough Already, called Soda Straws and EFPs, where I show you all you need to know about how you can prove that this is all not true.
Yep. Fantastic book, by the way, Scott. Now, I want to move on and ask you about the next piece of propaganda, and that was the main one, which was Iran is making a nuclear weapon. Scott, they are 15 days away from a nuclear bomb, and this is what Marco Rubio had to say.
Weaponization ambitions. Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I see that question being asked in the media. That's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
but that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build a
point
weapon.
in U.S. intelligence assessments. You know
no,
that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not been made.
I know that better than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But I'm asking you whether the order was given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons, because they can quickly make it 90. They have all the elements. They have. Why do they have a space program? Is Iran going to go to the moon? No, they're trying to build an ICBM.
No, but
so
that's a question. That's a question.
On it.
That's a question of intent. And in the intelligence assessment that it was that Iran wanted to be a threshold state and use this leverage. I'm talking about the public March assessment, and that's why I was asking you if you know something more from March.
But that's also an inaccurate
order was
representation
given.
of it. That's an accurate representation of it. That's not how intelligence is read. That's not how intelligence is used. Here's what the whole world knows. Forget about intelligence.
So, Scott, this clip is absolutely insane to me for so many reasons. I mean, Marco Rubio, what an absolute fool. Like, he's never heard of a satellite before. The only thing you have a space program is to go to the moon. But, his main point here, he's trying to do two things. One, Iran doesn't have to have given the orders to make a nuclear weapon, but Iran is very close to making a nuclear weapon. And so I'm just wondering how you would respond to Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Well, you can tell how disingenuous he is the way he frames it, where he goes, the only countries in the world that have 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons, because you can quickly make it 90%. Like, what? That's not right. Like, what is he actually talking about? Yes, they had some 60% uranium, and they always ask this as this rhetorical question, as though Kyle can't answer. Well, why do they need some 60% uranium then? Well, the answer is to try to negotiate it away. It's a bargaining chip, is all it ever was, and they only did that in direct reaction to the Israeli sabotage at Natanz in April 2021. And they announced, in response to this sabotage attack, which the Israelis took credit for, we're going to now enrich up to 60. Before that, they had gone up to 20%, which they do need, and they do have a legitimate use for in their medical isotope reactors. And it is, when we say percent, we mean percent U-235, which is the sweet stuff. They had gone up to 20% only after the assassination of their nuclear scientist, Fakhrizadeh, in December of 20. And before that, of course, they had been abiding by the restrictions under their safeguards agreement previously, but then also the JCPOA agreement of 2015, which America withdrew from, which Donald Trump withdrew from in 2018 at Netanyahu's behest. Instead of going over there and saying, listen, Ayatollah, I just got here, and I guess you have a deal with the guy before me, but I don't like it well enough, so I say, here, first let's shake hands, and then let's see if we can approve this deal. And instead of doing that, he just went over there and essentially, he just withdrew from the deal and added a bunch of sanctions. Said, capitulate to my every demand. No enrichment whatsoever. He made no progress his whole first term long doing that. That was 1 year into his presidency, basically. He made no progress with them. He left Joe Biden the same maximum pressure campaign, which Biden essentially kept on autopilot at the same time, too. You might have thought if Donald Trump was such an aberration that it took Vladimir Putin to install him in power and all of these things that the Democrats claimed, that Barack Obama's vice president, Joe Biden, might just get us right back in the deal that his boss had made a few years before. But nope. And Biden's, complete and utter failure to be a president on virtually every level is part of that, to even run his own life or his own affairs at all at that point. And so did nothing to resolve the issue. And when he left power, he left Donald Trump in the same position again. And worse, where now Iran has this 60% enriched uranium, but they don't have an American negotiating partner who's willing to be reasonable, right? It was important that, to the Iranians, it's their absolute red line that they keep some enrichment capability. And Trump and his people had to have known they have to find some wiggle room there or they're never going to get a deal. And they knew as long as they insisted on absolutely no enrichment, then they could not get an agreement. But then, it remains in question exactly what Trump's intentions were, as I was saying, or did I say this to you? It's part of the story. There's a question, I think, unresolved of whether Netanyahu and Trump really worked together on launching this thing or whether Netanyahu went ahead. And they sort of made up that story about using the Sunday negotiation date as a ruse or not. Whether that's really the truth of it or whether that's the cover story, I'm undecided on what to believe about that, quite frankly. But there's certainly, the reason Rubio has to forget the intelligence, right, is because if we accept that them not making a decision means that we're right where we really have been all along, that 60% is not much more than a red herring, then that means that we have all the time in the world to continue to negotiate and that there's no pretext for war. So now it's just working backwards and trying to come up with a way to say that whatever it was bad enough or we wouldn't be doing this, right? Which is really not the case.
So, Scott, last question here. There's this article that was written up by our colleague at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. The headline is, Trump says he'll bomb Iran again if it restarts enrichment program, but he doesn't think Iran, that will happen, that Iran will restart enrichment. And so it seems to me, Scott, that the Americans and the Israelis are demanding Iran give up all their enriched uranium, don't restart their nuclear enrichment program, and put caps on their ballistic missile program. Now, my concern is that those demands are too extreme, that Iran will never be able to agree to all that. And that means that we're basically put back on the same path to war that we were when Trump announced 60 days to negotiate or we go to war. That if you make demands that are unreasonable and you're saying if we don't get a deal, then we're going to go to war, even if there's really no cause for these two countries to go to war, it seems that we're putting ourselves on the path to it anyways.
Yeah. Well, look, it's a believable threat. You try to rebuild the Isfahan, I'll bomb that too. And America's and the Israelis, I guess, before the Americans ever got there, really decimated whatever anti-aircraft the Iranians had over at least much of the country. I don't know about every last S-300, Russian anti-aircraft system in the whole country, but America and Israel seem to have air dominance over the country. I'd hate to see America just flying sorties over Iran from now on, bombing whatever they don't like down there like it's the 1990s in Iraq. is sure to lead to catastrophe one way or the other. But, you know, Trump saying, all right, now let's have peace and be friends and these kinds of things, like he's so hyperbolic that when he is being positive, that does really open up the question whether we can just say, okay, that was the past, but this is a new day, and try to do something different here. The way Trump frames it is like, you know, we don't even need a nuclear deal at all because they ain't got nothing nuclear to have a deal over. And that he's just, I guess at these talks, he's just going to insist to the Ayatollah, just don't even do it, man. And then because your bluff's been called, it's too late and I'm the boss. But then the question is, can America offer enough concessions to this regime that they can somehow like have a peaceful relationship going forward? Or the more obvious answer, the more obvious answer would be that they would just say, no, we're doubling down. We're still enriching uranium. You'll never stop us from enriching uranium. Now we're enriching uranium in 55 locations all across Iran. You'll never find them all. And we're enriching up to 89%. How do you like that? Which you can set off a bomb at about 80% or possibly even less than that. But, you know, they could play hardball. I saw an expert suggest, you know, they could withdraw from the NPT and say, we'll rejoin when Israel joins the NPT, which even as a nuclear weapons state, they could, with Iran as a non-nuclear weapons state, rejoining at that time or whatever. So they're not completely helpless in this thing, but I mean, Kyle, I think they mostly are, right? Yeah. Before W. Bush and Barack Obama didn't dare. And in this case, really, it looks like it was Netanyahu that dared for Trump, but Trump has shown he's willing to go ahead and follow through too. So that being the case, right? Bluff being called, I don't know where we go from here. I really don't know what's going to happen or what the reaction inside Iran is going to be. I know that the Ayatollah is as cautious as he can be, but that he has to be as hard as he has to be too for his own survival's sake. You know, as the leader of any regime would be in the same position. So, and he's an old ass man, dude. He could, you know, the mullahs might replace him the day after tomorrow anyway, for all we know.
Right. Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your analysis. Of course, everybody check out the Libertarian Institute. I think that's where pretty much all of your work is, right, Scott? Is there anywhere else you want people to check out than the Institute and antiwar.com?
Yeah, ScotHorton.org. I got 6,000 interviews there. ScotHortonShow.com is my Substack. I'm starting to publish the audiobook of Provoked there for you, for those interested in that. And the brand new show with me and Daryl is also called Provoked, and that's going to be very soon at provoked.show and should be debuting on Friday.
All right. Well, that's awesome. I can't wait for the first episode, and I'll have you back on the show again soon, Scott.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Good to be with you.